we make it clear that we believe that private sector is the driver of the economy. I visit Tamil Nadu often. I travel extensively. I know the situation in Telangana. I know the situation in Karnataka, except in a part of Karnataka, Udupi, Mangalore area. The Ram temple is not a big talking point in these states that I mentioned. But the whole world had accepted a prevailing wisdom. The prevailing wisdom was quantitative easing. Pump in liquidity into the system. And Mr. Mukherjee also pumped in liquidity. The farm laws would have meant that corporates will become the virtual owners of the farm. And every farmer will become a tenant farmer. That certainly would have gone against the social and political and cultural ethos of this country.
Hello and welcome to The Print. I'm TCA Sharad Raghavan and I'm going to be in conversation with Mr. P Chidambaram, who actually needs no introduction, but I'll give a short one anyway for that small percentage of people who might need one. He's been the finance minister of the country, he's been the home minister of the country, and he's one of the most respected and erudite voices from the opposition currently, and absolutely well versed in India's polity, economy, and governance. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. So now I know before we started, you had told me that internal party matters would be kind of off the record. You will not talk about it. But how about what the party looks like from the outside? And I'll give you an example. Say things like Aadhaar, Narega, these are ideas that came during the UPA time, but it's this government, the Modi government, that has claimed ownership over them. How is it that the Congress managed to lose this ownership over ideas it itself came up with?
Well, we have not lost the ownership in the sense that we were careless or negligent. We didn't publicize it. Aadhaar, the no-frills account, which is now Jandan.
Right.
The mobile revolution, which the Modi government has appropriated.
Yes.
We didn't publicize it. That's because I think Dr. Manmohan Singh's style was understated. But I think people know that we started these great initiatives. And while they acknowledge that Mr. Modi has exploited it to the fullest, I think they know that these initiatives originated under the UPA regime. So that's it.
Do you feel that maybe a little more should have been done on the publicity?
Well, I think we should have publicized it, but not the way the Modi government splurges money.
Right.
I think this is a waste of money. Your deeds will speak for yourself. Yes, of course, you should publicize your good work, whatever work you do. To that extent, it's a failing on our part. But to the extent that the BJP government overdoes it,
right,
and splurges money, that's a failing too. That's money belonging to the people of India, and I don't think money should be splurged like that.
Right. And now another perception that is being built, whether rightly or wrongly, I'll let you answer. But basically the way that the Congress party and a lot of opposition parties, but especially the Congress, has been talking about the Modi government's relationship with big corporate houses, especially the Adanis, but in general the big corporate houses, gives the impression to the viewer that the Congress is a little anti-industrial or anti-capitalist. Is this something that the party would like to project? Is this a correct projection of its view?
Not at all. Please read our Udaipur declaration. Please read our Raipur AICC resolution. We make it clear, because I had a hand in writing them, we make it clear that we believe that private sector is the driver of the economy.
Right.
Along with a well-functioning, efficient public sector. But we give pride of place to the private sector. We started liberalization, delicensing, and free trade. Why would we turn against the private sector when we know that it is a private sector and the leadership in the private sector that has brought us this kind of growth over the last, say, 30 years? Right. We are certainly not against the private sector, but we are against monopolies. We are against oligopolies. And we are against anything that smacks of cronyism and denies a level playing field to different players.
Right. And now you mentioned liberalization, and in fact, that is actually another perception that used to be the case, that the Congress and reforms went together. But now that's another word that this government seems to have appropriated, that it's reforms that came since 2014 that are the real reforms. So again, is that a word that you feel that the Congress needs to reclaim?
No. You see, Modi government is in fact anti-reform in many areas. Okay. For example, on trade, they have regressed. They have gone back to protectionism, high tariffs, right, and non-tariff barriers. So they have actually regressed. The Modi government has regressed on direct taxes. According to me and according to many knowledgeable economists, the proportion of direct taxes must exceed the proportion of indirect taxes, right, which is what we have achieved. Now they have gone back to indirect taxes being the major source of revenue. They have cut corporate taxes, which is debatable whether you should have cut it to 22%. Right. But they have cut corporate taxes, which is debatable. But look at the other things they have done. The other things they have done is, for example, they have written off loans in 10 years of 14.56 lakh crore. Right. Which I think is a bonanza to the corporate sector. Comparable number for our 10 years is only 2.2 lakh crore. Their number is 14.56 lakh crore.
And them saying that they can still recover these written off loans, they aren't waived off, does that cut any ice with you?
No, it doesn't. It didn't cut ice with me when I was finance minister. It doesn't cut ice with me. This is what the banker will tell you. It's a technical write-off, sir. We still have it on the books of account and we will recover. What percentage have they recovered? I think they have recovered something like 2 to 5%. Right. But that's in a distress sale later. But the fact is that 14.56 lakh crore has been written off in the last 10 years. Now, that money, if you ask for fertilizer subsidy or food subsidy, they will tell you, oh, we don't have that kind of money. You ask for educational loan waiver, you ask for agricultural loan waiver, they'll say, we don't have that kind of money. But look at the kind of money that you've written off for corporates. And finally, on IBC, this is not the idea of IBC. In the central idea of IBC is a third party must be able to take over and run the business as a going concern. Right. It is to keep commercial businesses alive. Yes. But you have to pay a price for that. The lenders have to pay a price, the former owners have to pay a price. But look at the haircuts that the bankers are taking. This is apart from the write-off.
Right.
80%, 75% is the haircut which banks are taking.
So no real recovery in any
And
real
then
sense.
they say this is an NPA, we'll sell it to an asset reconstruction company. Now, once it goes to an asset reconstruction company, who follows it up? Who traces how much is recovered? I think what is happening is huge assets are changing hands for a very small price, and in the bargain, banks are hit. Banks are hit means depositors are hit.
Right. And so now coming a little bit to the banking sector, since you have been talking about it, but connected to that also, in a recent article when the government came out with its white paper, you did acknowledge that there were a few years of the UPA 2 period where there was high inflation and a high fiscal deficit because of the response to the global financial crisis. And separately, Raghuram Rajan has also talked about how the banking issues really started in 2006 to 8. Do you feel now, with so many years of retrospect, that there might be some things that you might have done different, that the UPA could have done different?
You see, I was not in charge of the finance ministry between December 2008 to July 2012.
Right.
Now, that is the period when we had runaway inflation and a high fiscal deficit. As a minister, I have to bear my share of collective responsibility. The person in charge of finance was not me,
Yes.
was Mr. Mukherjee. Be that as it may, we take collective responsibility. Now, we can second guess whether the first stimulus was correct, the second stimulus was correct, and certainly whether the third stimulus was correct. We can second guess that. But the whole world had accepted a prevailing wisdom. The prevailing wisdom was quantitative easing.
Right.
Pump in liquidity into the system. And Mr. Mukherjee also pumped in liquidity. Whether he overdid it or whether he thought it was sufficient, well, only he can answer. But the fact is, because of quantitative easing, we protected growth and jobs.
Right.
Growth and jobs. On the other hand, we paid in terms of price and in terms of fiscal deficit and price inflation. So on the one hand, you protected growth and jobs. On the other hand, you paid a huge price in terms of inflation and fiscal deficit.
Right.
Now, the people are the best judge, and the people judged us in 2014 and gave a negative vote. I accept it.
So that actually very clearly leads me to the next question, which economics doesn't seem to be a voting issue anymore. Whether it was demonetization or the way GST was rolled out and some of the pain that was caused by that, or the overnight lockdown, people aren't voting on that basis. If you look at the voting numbers, they seem to be happy with the way that the government is running the economy. So how does one bring economics back to being a big voting issue? Unemployment, all of these issues.
You see, there have been two national elections in the last 10 years, 2014 and 2019. I don't think state elections are decided by national economic policy. Right. State elections are decided by very many other considerations. So let's keep the state elections out. How do we win in Telangana and Himachal and lose in another state, Uttarakhand, and lose in another large state like Madhya Pradesh or Rajasthan? I don't think state elections are a good barometer of people's view of economic policy and economic management. National elections are. I think in 2014, the major issue was inflation.
Right.
We lost the election. We lost the election, although in 2013-14, we had contained the fiscal deficit, we had contained the current account deficit, and we left a growth of 6.4%. But the accumulated pain of high inflation over 3 or 4 years, I think perhaps decided the voters' final verdict. Add to that, there was a new person, a complete contrast to Dr. Manmohan Singh.
Right.
Dr. Manmohan Singh, understated, quiet, not vocal, not even in terms of electoral electioneering, very articulate. On the other hand, the other person was loud and vocal and Ache Din, Aane Wale Hai or whatever. And he was making all kinds of promises. 2 crore jobs a year, 15 lakh rupees in the bank account of every individual. He made wild promises. 2014 was a changeover. They said, all right, you've ruled for 10 years, we'll give the other man a chance.
Right.
Which I think is healthy democracy. I didn't vote for him, but I accept that that is a sign of a healthy democracy. There's an alternative. Why not give the alternative a chance? 2019 was cleverly played by the Modi government. It was only Pulwama.
I see.
Balakot and Pulwama. They beat they raised the level of frenzy to a point where they thought that here we had given a bloody nose to Pakistan, and therefore this deserves another term. Please remember, I'm not questioning Balakot and Pulwama, but certainly we did not give a bloody nose to Pakistan.
Right.
Pakistan continued to infiltrate its terrorists or terrorists in training. Infiltrations continue to happen. Terrorist incidents continue to happen. Therefore, there was no bloody nose. It was not a massive defeat for Pakistan like Indira Gandhi inflicted in the 1971 war. It was not it was one incident, but it was played up. All right. He won that election.
So economics at that point was blown out of the water.
It's Pulwama and Balakot.
Right.
You go back, mood of the nation, India Today issue in January 2019 did not give Modi government a majority.
Right.
January 2019 India Today issue did not give him a majority. Anyway, the 2024, we are building a narrative of unemployment and inflation.
Yes.
And asking the people to reflect on the rampant unemployment and very high inflation. Please understand, unemployment today is 10%. Among graduates, it goes up to 40%. Graduate up to the age of 30, 34, it is still 10%. So unemployment is very, very high. And this is measurable unemployment. It does not take into account underemployment. It does not take into account disguised employment. Or disguised unemployment.
Right.
You go and join your uncle's shop as the third assistant there. That's not employment. That's disguised unemployment. You have nothing else to do. So your mother said to her brother, please take my son also to your shop. He has already got two sons there and he takes the nephew also. Therefore, we are emphasizing high unemployment and inflation. Now, inflation in vegetables, inflation in milk is crossed all tolerance limits. And these are measured inflation mainly in some centers. As you go interior, inflation is higher.
Right.
I know if you get a vegetable at a price in a town or any processed food or whatever in the town, as you go away from the national highway or the train route, interior, inflation is higher. Naturally, because somebody has to go to the town and bring it to the village and sell it, so he adds his transport costs. So inflation is very high. As a result of that, private consumption of wage goods has fallen. Even today there is a report, private consumption of wage goods has fallen. Household savings has fallen to a historical low of 5.1%. Household debt has increased. Therefore, all this means that the poor are very, very distressed. And I'm not talking about the middle class. Even the middle class is hurt by inflation. In every middle class home, there's one unemployed person. But I'm talking about the bottom 20% who are below the middle class. They are even more hurt. They're even more distressed. So we hope that people will reflect on unemployment, inflation, and other economic metrics. But I can't say the Ram temple seems to be dominating the consciousness of at least the Hindi-speaking states.
You feel that it's not making that much of an impact in southern India?
No, not in southern India. I was in Kerala yesterday. I visit Tamil Nadu often. I travel extensively. I know the situation in Telangana. I know the situation in Karnataka, except in a part of Karnataka, Udupi, Mangalore area. The Ram temple is not a big talking point in these areas, these states that I mentioned. I can't really say about Maharashtra, Orissa, Bengal, Assam. I can't say. They are non-Hindi speaking states.
Right.
They have their own sense of religiosity. They have their own, gods which are dominant gods in those states. Ganesh in Maharashtra, Jagannath in Odisha, Durga in Bengal. So I don't know. What I don't know, I don't want to comment. But in the Hindi-speaking states, the Ram temple seems to be a very, very large issue.
I see. And now sticking to the southern states and coming back a little bit to economics and finance, the issue of devolution right now is very big. A lot of the southern states are up in arms about the fact that they're saying they aren't getting their fair share from the center. What the main argument they're making is that the center is relying too much on cesses and surcharges, and so the divisible amount, the pie, is smaller. The center, for example, today in an interview, the FM talked about how the center has a lot of responsibilities that only the center has. Things like defense, roads, railways, that requires money, and so it uses these cesses to spend on those. Do you feel that the 16th Finance Commission needs to come up with some sort of hybrid policy where the center can keep its cesses but maybe a higher percentage of devolution? What is the way forward here?
See, defense, foreign policy, railways is not a new responsibility that was assumed by the Modi government. It's been there since 1947. Defense, foreign policy, railways has always been a central subject. Nevertheless, in 1950, when they made the constitution, the constitution makers created the instrument of a finance commission to say what portion of central taxes will be devolved.
Right.
Now you're defeating that provision by levying a cess rather than a tax. All right, there's always been one or two cesses which the center appropriated, but not this kind. The Dr. Y.V. Reddy Finance Commission recommended 42%.
That's the 14th finance.
I think 14th.
Right.
42%. 1% is taken away for Jammu and Kashmir. So 41%. But the effective devolution is only about 32%, which means that central revenues, a very significant portion of central revenues, which ought to have come as taxes, is coming as non-taxes. This is actually deceiving the states and sidestepping the provision in the constitution for central tax devolution.
Right.
That apart, there is another argument. I think the state finance ministers and the central minister are talking across each other. Devolution of central taxes is only one method, one vector by which, one vertical by which money from Delhi is distributed.
Right.
There are grants in aid of revenue deficit. There are special schemes which the center bears a larger portion and the state bears a smaller portion. There is disaster relief fund, and there are special occasions where grants are given. In all these 3 or 4 matters, other than tax devolution, we are not talking about tax devolution.
All the
We are talking about all others. All others, clearly, finance ministers I've spoken to Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Bengal, Karnataka, they all say that there's clearly discrimination and favoritism in favor of BJP ruled states and disfavor for non-BJP ruled states.
I see.
Now, there's no interstate council, there's no planning commission. So where do the chief ministers collectively confront the prime minister and the finance minister? They have abolished all the mechanisms.
Do you feel there needs to be a
Of
return?
course, there should be a planning commission kind of body where the states enter into in-depth discussion with the planning commission members. No, Niti Aayog is just a spokesperson of the government.
Right.
And the interstate council doesn't meet. There's no interstate council meeting at all. Therefore, where do the chief ministers and the finance ministers of states collectively confront the prime minister and the finance minister?
Where they could possibly speak to the finance minister again seems to be another contentious issue. That's the GST Council. And now with GST, of course, now the UPA's idea of GST did not have the element of compensation. But the Modi government, they brought in this compensation for 5 years, saying that for any loss we will...
Wrong.
They had the UPA?
Wrong. You go back to the minutes of the meetings of the finance ministers, the predecessor to the GST Council.
Right.
We had, Yashwant Sinha had constituted this meeting of this group of finance ministers. All the finance ministers were present, and then we appointed the vice chairman or whatever.
Right.
And in fact, Sushil Modi was vice chairman for a long time. Then the J&K finance minister was vice chairman for some time. In that meeting, I assured the ministers when the debate about GST was going on. 2 states were holding out. One was Madhya Pradesh and one was Gujarat.
Gujarat.
And the two ministers, the Madhya Pradesh was that elderly gentleman who was finance minister for quite some time. I forget his name. The Gujarat was an important minister in Gujarat, but he has been now virtually sidelined. The two finance ministers told me that they were under instructions not to agree to GST.
I see.
I told them, listen, I promise you that we will compensate you for any losses. There will not be any compensation required, because I was going by the experience of VAT. In VAT also there was the same issue. Suppose we lose money, but they didn't lose money. VAT was implemented. VAT was implemented. All states came on board after we assumed office in 2004. All states were on board by middle of 2005.
Right.
The last state were Tamil Nadu and UP, Uttar Pradesh. I met both Mr. Karunanidhi and Mr. Mulayam Singh Yadav and brought them on board. So I said, don't worry, I promise you we will compensate you for any losses.
Okay.
There won't be any loss in GST, but we will compensate you. So the compensation idea was very much on the table, on the record.
I see.
The GST Council came and they formalized the compensation. But why have they discontinued the compensation?
It was supposed to be for only 5 years.
Doesn't mean you can't extend it.
Right.
If they still suffer losses, if they can still prove that they would have otherwise got revenues through sales tax, which they are not getting by way of GST, why not extend the compensation? All the states, including BJP states, have demanded compensation. But the BJP finance ministers dare not speak above whisper.
I see. So, there are a lot of ministers, state ministers, who are talking about the fact that the compensation cess that's being collected now is in surplus of what it needs to repay the loans that it has taken for the back-to-back loans and all of that. So they might even be in a position to transfer it back to the states or maybe even divide it to the states. But you're saying that maybe the cess should carry on for a longer time so that the states can be compensated.
See, GST is a flawed law.
Okay.
In design, it was defective. Its implementation is worse. I'm not saying this. I'm not the only one saying this. Dr. Arvind Subramaniam, in his revenue neutral rate report,
Right.
echoed our position. Single rate, low rate, almost no exemptions, except maybe for some goods which have to be exempted, like wheat and paddy. But his report was ditched, disregarded, and sooner than later, Dr. Arvind Subramaniam also quit the government.
Right.
So this design was flawed. And I had told the finance minister at that time, Mr. Arun Jaitley, did call 4 or 5 of us and consult us. And I said, Arun, this is wrong law. There's no compulsion that you have to implement it on 1st of July. Postpone it by 3 months or so. And we can sit down and discuss. No, my instructions are this has to be rolled out on 1st of July. And he pushed through the law with the majority it had in the Lok Sabha. It was a finance bill, so the Rajya Sabha didn't matter at all. He pushed through the law, and the design was basically flawed, and the implementation is worse. You have weaponized the GST law. I mean, you talk about weaponization of PMLA, weaponization of PC Act, weaponization of customs law. But the most weaponized law is the GST law.
I see.
Ask any trader, ask any conclave of businessmen. On one issue, they are united in their opposition to the government is this GST law must be scrapped. Which is why in 2019, our manifesto, we promised it, Because I had spoken to several groups, and I've spoken to several groups even this time. We promise that this law, GST law, will be repealed and we will have GST 2.0.
I see.
It's the most weaponized law. The poor trader is intimidated, harassed, threatened every day.
So will you, GST 2.0, do you feel
Absolutely.
it will have fewer rates?
It will be a single rate and a low rate with as few exemptions as possible. It's becoming more difficult because they have given a large number of exemptions.
Right.
And people are used to exemptions. But a single rate and a low rate should bring people around as few exemptions as possible.
But I remember Mr. Jaitley talking about, this was earlier when I was covering the finance ministry, he used to talk that how can you have the same rate for a Mercedes and a Hawaii Chappal?
You don't, which means you don't understand GST. You don't understand GST.
Right.
The beauty about GST is it's a uniform law. It's a uniform law.
Yes.
And that is the beauty of GST. Goods and services are, for example, when we started levying service tax, there was a huge uproar in this country.
Yes.
Dr. Manmohan Singh introduced service tax. How can you levy tax on a service? People did not understand that service is as valuable as goods. It has a value. People understand the value of a good. People don't understand the value of a service. But then people, over a period of time, understood that like goods can be taxed, services can be taxed also.
Right.
So they've accepted GST. Therefore, if you start in the premise, how can you tax gold and say shoes the same rate? You don't understand the principle of a GST. GST world over is a single rate. In some countries, it is a double rate. But you don't have a country where it has a rate from 40% to 0%.
Right. Right. And okay, so now we've talked about devolution, which is a current issue. Another current issue right now is MSPs. Do you feel that the demand for making MSP a legal right is something that should happen? And also, do you feel that the Swaminathan Committee formula, the C2 formula for MSC, C2 plus 50%, taking into account all the costs, is that a viable formula?
See, Swaminathan Committee had many recommendations. When we say we accept the Swaminathan Committee, that's an acceptance in principle. Like any government accepts a report, it's an acceptance in principle.
Right.
Which part of the Swaminathan Committee can be implemented will depend upon the circumstances and the financial position of the country. But on one thing, we are clear, and we have announced it also. Congress President announced it last week. We will give a legal guarantee to MSP.
Okay.
That's all he's announced. We have also said that the CACP will be made a statutory body. But that's logical. If you are giving a legal guarantee to MSP, the body that recommends the MSP must have a legal status.
Right.
So the CACP will be made a legally sanctioned body, a statutory body. It will recommend an MSP. That MSP is a legal right. What's wrong with that? Perfectly right.
And will other people be able to buy below that MSP?
These are details which have to be worked out. In my mind, I have worked it out, but we have not announced it.
Okay.
In the APMC, it can only be traded at MSP.
Right.
Outside the APMC, the farmer has the freedom. Now, these have to be fleshed out. If, for example, we create a digital marketplace in which the buyer, we are not talking about APMC. APMC is a given.
Right.
It has to be at the MSP. outside the APMC, if you and I agree to buy and sell grain, if there is a digital record in which we agree to upload our agreement, what is wrong in saying that that agreement must be at MSP?
Right. And
there is anyone can have a fundamental objection. We are agreeing outside the APMC. We are willing to make that record public. We are uploading it on a public digital register. Why not say the transaction between the two of you has to be at MSP?
Right. I understand. And do you now feel that the farm laws were a thing that might have helped the farmers?
No. The farm laws had other problems. The farm laws would have converted all farmers to tenant farmers.
I see.
The farm laws would have meant that corporates will become the virtual owners of the farm. And every farmer will become a tenant farmer. That certainly would have gone against the social and political and cultural ethos of this country.
Right. I understand. And now another topical issue, it is somewhat economic, but it's to do with electoral bonds.
Yes.
Now the Supreme Court has said that they are unconstitutional, which is...
They will use mild language.
Yes.
Remember the language I used on the day electoral bonds were issued? I said this is legalized corruption.
Yes. I do remember that phrase. And but now, how do you prevent the fear that a lot of people have now is that a lot of political donations will go back to anonymous cash?
But that was always there. Even electoral bond, it was there.
But it will now become a lot more.
No. It only means that corporates cannot bribe their way through electoral bonds. See, the Tata Trust was always giving money to parties. The Airtel Trust was always giving money to parties. There were other trusts.
Right.
That mechanism can continue. The earlier provision of the Companies Act that up to 7.5% of your profits over the last 3 years can be contributed by check. That was abolished. That can continue. So, corporate donations without a quid pro quo, without an implied quid pro quo, can continue through trusts and through the 7.5% rule.
Right.
That would have to be disclosed.
Yes.
Who is the giving, who is accepting, all have to be disclosed. It has to be disclosed to the Election Commission. Those two avenues were there, that avenues can continue. What is the difficulty? Why did you make it anonymous? It is anonymous to the whole world except two people. Only two people will know who gave whom what. One is the chairman of the SBI,
right.
One is the head of the government. Now, why the chairman of the SBI can know? Why should I, an opposition party, not know who gave whom to what and when?
Right.
Please understand, who gave is important. Whom it was given to is important.
Yes.
How much was given is important. Equally, when was it given?
Absolutely.
Was it in anticipation of a concession, or was it an earnest money for a concession?
Right.
I don't know.
But there is now, even now they're saying that there is no way to actually do that matching.
That we'll see. Under the present dispensation, perhaps they can get away with excuses. You can't match. But imagine or assume that a new government will come into place.
Right.
If a new government comes into place, I'm sure we will find a way to find out who gave whom, what and when.
I see. And now, again, coming back a little bit to politics, nothing about the internal matters of the Congress, but does the Congress and, well, some of the other parties, I'm sure you've spoken to some of them, do they have a counter to what I can only call the personality cult around the Prime Minister? Or is the only option that you wait for him to hang up his boots?
You see, there have been prime ministers in this country who were not projected as prime minister before the election.
Mm-hmm.
Morarji Desai was not presented as the sole candidate for prime minister in 1977. There were several contestants, and Morarji Desai emerged when the Janta formed the government.
Right.
Deva Gowda was not a pre-election candidate.
Right.
Gujral was not a pre-election candidate.
Mm-hmm.
VP Singh was not a pre-election candidate. Chandrasekhar was not a pre-election candidate. They were among several candidates.
Right.
For I think it's possible, if the opposition bloc wins power, wins the election, it's possible that a leader can be elected by consensus.
Okay.
It's possible. It's not impossible. It's not unprecedented either, both in India and abroad.
But this victory, you feel it can be driven without a single personality pushing it along or pulling it along?
See, again, I go back to 1977.
Mm-hmm.
The Janta Party defeated the Congress Party,
Right.
and defeated Srimati Indira Gandhi without projecting a person as the leader. The popular face was Jayaprakash Narayan, but everybody knew that Jayaprakash Narayan was not going to become Prime Minister.
Mm-hmm.
Again in 2004, Mrs. Sonia Gandhi was presented as the Congress's face,
Right.
but eventually it turned out to be Dr. Manmohan Singh.
Yes.
Therefore, I don't think we need to box ourselves into this limited thinking that unless there is a presidential kind of contest, one-on-one, you can't defeat an incumbent prime minister. That is a presidential contest, not a parliamentary contest. I agree, a single leader would help boost the chances of the opposition.
Right.
But the absence of a single leader on which everybody is agreed does not necessarily mean that you cannot defeat the incumbent government.
I see. Okay, and now my final question is aimed at you personally a little bit. You have held key positions in the government in the past. You've done a lot over your political career in the government, outside the government. Do you have anything you feel you have left to do in the government, something that you want to achieve more? Or on the other side, do you have any regrets?
There are no regrets as such. I think the best thing I did was, as Commerce Minister in Mr. Narasimha Rao's government, announced that trade will be free.
Right.
Now, those 4 words, trade will be free, I think were revolutionary words in June, July 1991. I had the full support of and the prompting of Dr. Manmohan Singh and the support of Mr. Narasimha Rao. But imagine in 1991, a minority government could break with tradition going back to 1947 and standing up and saying on the 4th of July 1991 that imports and exports will be free.
Right.
That was a breaking the mold.
Absolutely.
July 24 morning, we broke the mold on industrial policy. Yes. July 24 afternoon in the budget, Dr. Manmohan Singh broke the mold as far as fiscal policy is concerned.
Right.
So trade policy, industrial policy, fiscal policy, the molds were broken in a matter of 20 days. That, I think, was the most exciting period.
Okay.
And then, of course, everything followed. In 2004 to 2014, what the Dr. Arvind Subramaniam calls the boom years,
Right.
the golden period of growth happened between 2006, 2005, 6, 6, 7 and 7, 8. I happen to be the finance minister, therefore I'm entitled to reflect in, bask in reflected glory. Those 3 years, we showed the world, we showed Indians that 9% growth is not impossible. That India can achieve 9% growth. Never before, never after have we achieved 9% growth. So those were exciting times. Yes, we could have done more. Suppose we had the majority which Mr. Modi has, 303. I have no doubt in my mind we would have done far more sweeping reforms. I told Arun Jaitley when he came back, when they came to power 270, I said, don't miss this chance. With your allies, you have got over 300. Do structural reforms. But they did nothing.
And even now in Modi government,
even now they've got 303, and with the alliance they've got over 350. They are not doing structural reforms. Why don't you bring the direct taxes code? We had the courage to draft the direct taxes code. And my last conversation with Ms. Sushma Swaraj was, why don't you help us pass the direct taxes code? She said, Chidambaram, we have no appetite for reform anymore. We'll see after the elections. Now, the direct taxes code could have been passed. Why? You have been in office for 10 years. Why have you not brought a direct taxes code? It's a great opportunity to clean up the income tax law. The income tax law is a paradise for lawyers and judges. You interpret it. I mean, I won't. For income tax officers, it's a free for all. Each ITO, each assessing officer can interpret it.
Absolutely.
And then the Central Board of Direct Taxes will come out with 120 circulars a year. And every time a provision is interpreted differently by the courts, they will come out with an amendment.
Right.
I had introduced a rule that all circulars of CBDT and CBEC must be introduced only on the first of the month of the quarter. There will be only 4 dates in which you can issue circulars. Because otherwise, circulars were being issued every week or every twice a week.
And that's since been done away with.
No, it's not done away with. There are a whole host of circulars now.
No, the once a quarter.
Yeah, once a quarter was abandoned even after I left the finance ministry to go to the home ministry.
I see.
See, bad habits have a way of coming back now.
Right.
Bad habits have a way of coming back. So there was so much reform can be done in the tax structure. My regret is we could not pass the direct taxes code. Okay. That is one regret, because I spent hours, literally hours, closeted with 3 officers and dictating every provision of the direct taxes code.
Wow.
I mean, several weekends were spent on that, apart from the usual routine work. And then Mr. Mukherjee came and updated it. I came back in 2012 and updated it. So the 3 versions of the direct taxes code. And why did they not implement the direct taxes code, pass and implement the direct taxes code? That is a regret. I was an unwilling mover to the Home Ministry, as you know. Everybody knows. There's no secret about it.
Right.
But I thought whatever I had to do, I had done in the first 5 months. Passed the laws, set up the NAT grid, set up the NIA, set up the CCTN network, and all that was done by January. And my regret is that I agreed to continue as Home Minister even after the election.
I see.
Because there's nothing more to do in terms of reform, and it is only trying to administer the country, etc. Which I was interested in bringing about change. I was bringing about structural change or philosophical change in policies. That was a regret, but then that's life. You have good moments, you have not so good moments.
Right. But on that note, thank you so much for a fascinating conversation. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.